Ori and the Blind Forest is one of my favorite games ever. I'd place it firmly in my top 5 right now, so when I learned that a sequel was announced, I was very excited to see where the story would go and what our little light spirit would do. Ori and the Blind Forest was such an emotionally powerful game, it left me feeling elated and torn up when I first finished it, and I wanted more of that. The sequel, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, didn't quite do it for me, and I want to talk about that. In early 2020, I found myself at the computer a lot more, for, some reason. Although thankfully I was still working at the time. It was a great time too, with lots of online D&D, 2 sequels to some of my favorite games coming out, Doom Eternal, and the topic of this video, Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Perhaps I'll talk about the Doom game some other time. Both sequels didn't quite do it for me, something was not there. Both were sweeping upgrades as far as gameplay went, but the stories didn't quite do it for me. It was like a weird aftertaste left in my mouth when I'd finished. This dissatisfaction nagged at the back of my head for months until one day I set my phone down in front of me at work and just talked about it. And that led me here, an off-the-cuff 30-minute rant next to some operating heavy machinery and a lot of redrafting. So I set about replaying both Ori games, capturing footage and taking notes on the way. I expanded on what I brought up in that original rant, did some research and watched other reviewers, but I didn't find anyone talking about the problems I had with the story at length. First, a brief history of my time with the Ori games. I began Ori like I begin many games, a false start where I play a few hours, put it down for a few months because of life, and then start over and play the whole thing in one go. I was originally pointed to the game by a YouTube reviewer who has since left the internet for his own health. It was his absolute favorite game, and his passion for it inspired me to give it a try. While I had this script in the background, he actually made a reappearance briefly and answered some questions, including some about Will of the Wisps. I'll save these for later when they're relevant, but I'm glad that we got an update on his well-being, and it seems like he's doing well. Back when I started Ori and the Blind Forest, I was a semi-regular micro-streamer on Twitch. Although I don't stream anymore, it was a fantastic experience with some of my regulars at the time and some fans of the game dropping by to chat and share tidbits about the game and watching me get all weepy by the end of it. Because that's what the Blind Forest does to me. It's such an emotionally evocative game. Nothing had done that to me before, and I loved it. After that, I replayed it again a few months later to chase that emotional high, and a third time before playing Will of the Wisps. I played Will of the Wisps offline in my own time, a few weeks after it had come out to allow for patches to roll out, and frankly, I was busy at the time. It was not the cleanest game on launch with quite a few bugs, and I had put down streaming for a while due to bad internet and general disinterest, so unfortunately, no clips of these bugs on my end exist, but there is quite a few. Otherwise, it was a good experience. The gameplay changes made for a much more responsive and exciting experience, with better button mapping and many more options of how to approach any situation or combat in the game. The replayability was much higher. I even have some ideas for personal challenge runs someday. What I can say before going into full story discussion territory is that I can absolutely recommend both games for different reasons. Ori and the Blind Forest is an emotionally evocative, difficult Metroidvania platform that will enchant you with a wondrous soundtrack, beautiful world, challenging platforming, while racking up a body count in the hundreds by the time you finish the story. And Ori and the Will of the Wisps is an updated, equally or perhaps more difficult Metroidvania with a new focus on combat, offering much more content than the first game and more replayability. Both have wondrous and unique art styles and soundtracks, but if you've not played them, toss them on your Steam wishlist and wait for a sale. The Blind Forest regularly goes down to $5 during sales, and I've bought it for friends before. Or buy them now if this video leaves you feeling convinced. With my primary gripe being story related, I'm gonna have to give a recap of both stories here. I can't really say I tried to keep it brief, so spoilers abound. Alright, let's do this. The game seamlessly begins from the save file selection screen. The skies darken and a powerful wind blows as a great storm rages. The towering form of the spirit tree, with the light of the forest glowing in its branches, looms above the forest of Nibel. The spirit tree is the narrator of our story. Its deep, ancient voice tells us, "We shall always remember the night when I lost Ori to the great storm." Buffeted by the winds, a glowing leaf is dislodged and we follow it as the wind currents carry it far away. It drifts over the head of Naru, this pudgy lump of love, makes her way over to investigate, and finds this small, little glowing spirit resting on a root. Naru embraces the light like a child of her own. We cut to inside their home as Ori awakens and makes their way outside. We see how Ori and Naru live, working together, harvesting fruits from nearby trees, and even building a bridge to cross to an unharvested portion of the forest. It's a really endearing start showing the happy little life they led. As Ori gathers up armfuls of fruit to return to the cave, we see ethereal lights in the skies, and the giant spirit tree blazing in the background. Ori stands entranced momentarily as the music swells powerfully, but Naru swoops in and carries Ori into the cave. On that night, the spirit tree called out to Ori, and they did not answer. Something bad happened to the forest that night. Some indeterminate amount of time passes, and the very color is drained from the world. The tone of music changes, and the forest is dying around our little family. As the food dwindles, Naru ventures out in search of more. The spirit tree can be seen in the background, lightless, leafless, a husk of its majesty earlier. Naru is unsuccessful in reaching one of the last bunches of fruit, taking a nasty fall and returning empty-handed. Yet she still insists that Ori have the last of it while she rests. The forest is blinded. Ori traces the path taken by Naru and, being much more suited to climbing, easily gathers the last of the fruit. Backtracking with the desperately needed fruits, Ori remembers happier times. Entering the cave, Ori happily presents the fruits to the still form of Naru. Finding that she has passed. Prodding at the still form, urging her to wake up. Orphaned by the decay of the forest, Ori has no reason to stay. Traveling farther and farther from their little cave, becoming more lethargic and struggling to climb even short distances and dragging themselves through spikes. Ori crawls out on a log, unable to stand, weakened and fading fast. As the spirit tree says, "When cries were met with silence, and hope went astray, when my child's strength faltered, and the last breath was drawn, Ori dies. Our little light spirit dies, alone, and as small flowers shedding the same light as Ori begin to sprout, the fog in the background clears, and the massive form of the spirit tree flares with its last vestiges of power. My light revived Ori, and a new age had dawned. This is where the game begins. Ori rises from the ground and the game is saved for the first time. We are left to bound around and explore the sunken glades. I want to gush a little bit here. In the first 10 minutes of the game, we have been taken on an emotional roller coaster. From tender highs of love and cooperation to the absolute depths of death, despair, and starvation. It's a powerful opening. When I show this game to friends, it never fails to resonate or make their eyes misty. This is just the beginning of the game, and the attention to detail and craft has been incredible. From the seamless menu to the opening cutscene transition all the way through the opening segment, Moon Studios really flexes their skill here. Now back in control, we are able to begin exploring the sunken glades. It is a hostile place, with enemies seeking to snuff out Ori's light. With no way to fight back currently, dodging and environmental kills are the only option. As Ori descends further, we find a larger area where the spirit tree speaks again. Ori finds a tiny light on the ground, and after picking it up, the light gently explodes. This is Sen, the light and eyes of the forest. Part of the spirit tree, which seems to be a symbiotic thing, a fusion of a mighty tree and a bright light. Sen says that they were dropped here when she loosened her grip. But before we find out who she is, dark creatures of the wood attack. But now we can fight back. Sen can shoot these little homing beams of light when enemies are close to Ori. This makes combat movement and avoidance based, as you remain close enough to the enemy for Sen to do the shooting, but you have to dodge all the attacks while continuing to blast them. After dispatching them, Sen tells us that we must return to the spirit tree. While making our way through the sunken glades, we get tidbits on the decay and what has happened to the forest since Sen was pulled from the spirit tree. These doors were erected for protection from the decay, and they are the primary puzzle of the game. You have to find keystones in multiple areas to open these doors, and it will be done throughout the game. Deep in the spirit cave, we find a tree growing with a light like the spirit tree. These ancestral trees are the remains of other light spirits like Ori who fell to the decay. This is also where we get a sense of the time scale of the game. Sen says, when he, the spirit tree, called out to find you many years past, we were attacked, wounded, and killed by our foe. Now, these ancestral trees are all that's left behind. So it's been many years since the spirit tree set the skies ablaze in that introduction cutscene. The forest withered and died over years of decay without the tree's light. This is where all my timeline questions come from. Now, I have tried to put together a timeline of the events of this game, but between the dialogue, environmental clues, wiki entries, and other reviews, I can't make sense of it. Some things only make sense if it's been months, while dialogue states otherwise, but it can be seen for certain that the forest is stagnant and decaying, void of friendly creatures with very few lively areas that have avoided the touch of decay. This ancestral tree is where we get the wall jump ability. A core part of Ori's movement is unlocked here, allowing us to climb and platform through the caves, making our way to the spirit tree. Now, as we arrive at the foot of the spirit tree, we can see how absolutely gigantic it is. Still faintly glowing with some of its former light, here we see a cutscene of the night of the light ceremony when the tree called out to Ori. So while Ori was dumbstruck on top of a hill dropping some fruit, this is what was happening at the spirit tree. The intense light given off by the tree had angered something, and the music drops as a gigantic owl swoops in, terrorizing the light creatures around the tree before turning on the spirit tree itself. It seizes upon the light, rending Sen from the branches of the tree, and Kuro carries the light far away, crushing it in her talons before casting it down in the sunken glades where we later found Sen. The fate of the forest rests on Ori, the last light spirit who must restore the balance of the three elements the spirit tree used to sustain. The element of water is high atop the Ginso tree, the element of winds deep within the forlorn ruins, the element of warmth beneath the fires of Mount Horu. To restore Nibel to its former self, we must rekindle the lights before it's too late. The Ginso tree is up first, and we begin heading that way. So if you look at the Ori games from a high-altitude view, it's kind of a hippy-dippy little story about a forest spirit trying to save the woods. You've seen similar stories before about restoring the balance of nature. It's classic. For example, most recently I've seen Moana, which takes the very same structure where they're returning the light or heart of the ocean to that island. It's been a little while. Anyway, the games break down kind of like a Legend of Zelda format, where you're going to a temple, but first you have to do something to get access to that temple. In that temple, you'll get an upgrade or two that help you get through it, and then restore the light to the element at the end of it. And one bit at a time while this is happening, we'll start coming into contact with the main antagonist of the story. Nothing revolutionary, but man, it does a great job. On the way to the Ginso tree, we obtain the Flame Burst ability. This is an explosive upgrade to Sen, capable of destroying walls and rocks. But it's too energy costly at this point of the game to use in combat. We're still stuck just pew-pewing enemies down. As we approach the Ginso tree, we see a dark, spindly figure caressing the water vein, a key of some sorts needed to enter the tree. Sen says this is a Gumon from the Forlorn Ruins, and we must follow him to get the water vein back. If you have a keen eye, you would have spotted Gumo in the foreground in a few places. He's been watching us. Chasing down Gumo is our kind of side quest for entering the Ginso tree. There's a tangent like this before every temple where you have to go retrieve a key or find a new ability to continue. Gumo's a slippery one, keeping ahead of Ori while stirring up enemies and avoiding hazards, making his way back to his hideout, wherein many of the hazards are of his own creation and he will have the upper hand. Ori is dropped from a bridge deep into Gumo's hideout. Down here, navigating between crushers, spikes, enemies aggravated by Gumo, in what the Blind Forest sees as some kind of boss fight. We basically have this boss fight multiple times over the game, and it never gets much harder. Ori finds another ancestral tree that grants us the double jump, further increasing our movement options. While primarily horizontal, the double jump gets us just enough height to scale this wall here to cross the area where we originally dropped, eventually catching up to Gumo as he tries to crush Ori with falling rocks, which backfires on him, pinning him down. It's like a mini escape sequence, but more annoying. 4 out of 10. After climbing and dodging the rocks, we get to see the childish naivete and merciful nature of Ori. Gumo, this dark creature, tried to get Ori killed multiple times. But when in need, Ori will still help. As the spirit tree says, Ori brought kindness and hope to his heart. Gumo sheepishly pushes the water vein to Ori before bounding away. And now with the water vein, we can enter the Ginso tree. So let's get back over there real quick. Now, the Ginso tree is amazing. It's my favorite temple in the game. We enter this giant tree and have to climb all the way to the top, teleporting through these portals, platforming higher and higher. It also makes the spirit flame act weird when you shoot it going through the portals. As we make our way up the Ginso tree, Ori finds another ancestral tree, Treeception, where we obtain the Bash ability. Now, let me take a second here to tell you about Bash. It is the best fucking ability in the game. It is the most iconic movement option for Ori. It allows for you to use projectiles, lanterns, enemies to launch Ori in any direction you want, launching the projectile, enemy, whatever, in the opposite direction. With proper gameplay, it can make you untouchable, an avatar of destruction. Projectile? Nah, bashable object. Enemy? Nah, bashable object. Part of the background? I'll bash off it anyway. It's amazing. I remember after convincing my best friend to play the game, I got a text from him while I was at the gym saying he had gotten Bash, and suddenly everything had changed. And I knew what he was in for next, because higher up the tree only gets better. Except for this boss fight against an elemental here. At least it's not the worms. A little above this we find the element of waters, corrupted and grown over by foul, thorny growths. Completing the puzzles on the left and right sides of the tree, we're able to clear the decay from the element of waters. With the corruption clear, Sen uses their light to jumpstart the element of waters as torrents begin pouring into the tree, bursting from the background and rising quickly. We must flee the waters. This is my favorite escape sequence in the game. The triumphant yet tense music plays seamlessly in the background as you struggle higher and higher, each attempt carrying you higher through the tree as you bash off of anything and everything, racing the water to safety. It seems to be universally praised as the best escape sequence in the game, testing your capability with the abilities currently available to Ori, or if you do some sequence breaking, you can bring some abilities they didn't expect you to have here. Exploding from the top of the Ginso tree in a geyser of water and light, it seems that everything is alright. One big step on the way to save Nabil. But then, in a flash, it is seen that some of the branches in the background are not what they seem, but the head of the titanic owl, Kuro. Disturbed from her slumber by the restoration of the element of water, she is awoken and fucking pissed. Landing on the tree and bearing down on Ori, this owl that tore the light from the spirit tree, faced again with the last remains of that light and a remaining spirit. Driven by unknown hatred, she buffets Ori from the towering tree and swoops down to deliver the kill. This right here is my favorite cutscene of the game. It really shows the malevolence of Kuro and the overwhelming power facing Ori, as it all cuts to black. Saved by Gumo, Ori is delivered from an uncertain fate at the talons of Kuro, a merciful act in kind. The waters of Nabil are clear now, with the element restored, opening up new exploration options and upgrades. At this point in the game, I decided to go after some upgrades added in the DLC, as they are great movement options and will help me get more pickups, which I need because the hard difficulty is kicking me around. The DLC areas also add to the backstory of our adoptive mother, Naru. We see statues of Naru and her father, and signs of how they live through these areas. First is Blackroot Burrows, a visually striking place, pitch black and lit only by Ori's light and enemies. Eventually we find a lantern in there that can reveal platforms and dismiss light barriers that were in our way. Carrying the light through the burrows can be tedious, as you're subject to the cycle times of the moving platforms, and this sacrifices all of Ori's movement options for a waiting game. With the lantern restored, the darkness and haze is lifted, and a way forward is open. There's an ancestral tree here that contains my second favorite ability in the game, Dash. I like going fast, and I like being reckless when I play games, so this speaks to me. And, oh my god, is that another escape sequence? Yes, my favorite part of the game! We can see the boulder escape sequence is an exemplar of its kind. 10 out of 10. Below Blackroot Burrows is the Lost Grove, a more vibrant area with some challenging platforming and puzzles. We find more visions of Naru down here, a young Naru playing with some of the spirit guardians. Although Naru and her father were creatures of darkness living below the surface and away from the light of the spirit tree, Naru still wanted to play with the light spirits, before her father put a stop to that. Tell me they didn't touch you, Naru. From here we get the Light Burst ability, a lobbed grenade of sorts so it can light torches, but more importantly, gives us a bashable object on demand. This greatly transforms your movement options by giving you a vertical option anywhere you want. Ori has horizontal movement on lock with the double jump and the dash at this point, but not much in the way of vertical, so I always go for this ability at some point during each run of the game. From here the only way is down, finding the beach portion of the Lost Grove, probably the most vibrant and lively place in all of Nabil at this point. This is Naru's home. Well, this was Naru's home. This is where she grew up, but left and made a new home above in the forest. But why? After clearing a few bouncing puzzles using a light grenade, this opens the way to Naru's old home, where we see a depressingly familiar scene. Naru's father lays dead in their home. We see the memories of a young Naru growing up here, the two of them living a happy life. As she grows, and her father grows older, until one day, we see an older Naru coming to find his passing. Much like Ori, she left never to return. It was too painful to stay. Learning Naru's backstory here is a great addition to the game and makes later story developments all the more impactful. Back on track, and with that emotional damage behind us, we still have two elements of the forest to restore. Entering the Valley of Wind using the Spirit Burst ability to blow up a wall, the difficulty spike is immediate. The enemies are more aggressive, hit harder, and come at you faster. As we push towards the Misty Woods for the key to the Forlorn Ruins mentioned earlier by Sen, we come to the Valley of Wind itself. It's probably the largest single room in the game, a massive ravine dividing the map, and looming large above it all, Kuro, watching over the valley, ready to strike out and kill Ori if we venture too far out of cover. Forced to skirt the Valley of Winds and do this sick bash segment, Ori and Sen find themselves high above Kuro. A loose clump of rocks held together by roots is conveniently placed. Stomping on these sends them tumbling down onto Kuro. This is the only time we get to attack Kuro, and the closest we ever get to injuring her. Only succeeding in driving her away. That's how vast the power difference between her and Ori is. As she flies away, a feather is lost, which drifts down to Ori. This feather allows us to glide and control some of our vertical movement. I certainly don't make enough use of it when playing, because it makes you slow down. Now that we are able to enter the Misty Wood unaccosted, a mind-bending, visually twisted area distorted by the haze spewed from the shrouded lantern greets us. Mild motion sickness aside, navigating the warped area can be difficult. Areas you go through change, doorways you just pass through will take you back to a different room. It's all very confusing. Eventually, after pushing far enough forward, you find a torch in the dark, and after dealing with the ever-shifting terrain and an excessive amount of slimes, we gain the ability to climb from this ancestral tree here. However, we still have to make our way to that light we saw earlier. The shifting petal puzzle is probably my favorite part of the Misty Woods. Each time you jump, the petals will swap, meaning that you can only get through one of these segments with precisely the jumps they intend you to. Unless you bring abilities you shouldn't have here like Dash and the Light Grenade. Even with those abilities in tow, it's a fun and challenging part of the area. And then we come to the boss fight. You've seen it before. You're locked in a room, there's a mortar worm, it jumps, you shoot it. That's about it. And then comes the carry segment. It's very unfortunate. It removes the most important and fun feature of the game, Ori's movement. There's even less platforming in this one than Blackroot's Burrows. It's literally a straight line. It requires you to dodge some enemies and projectiles. That's it. 0 out of 10, not the Ginso tree. At last, finally placing the torch restores the true form of the Misty Woods, and nets us the Gumon Seal, which we will use to enter the Forlorn Ruins below and find the element of wind. As we descend, the area becomes icy and frozen, and as the temple opens before us, we see that we are again being followed. The Forlorn Ruins are an icy wasteland, frozen after the element of wind lost its light. It's a stark sight. The bodies of Gumon spread about, cold and dead. The Gumon used the light of the spirit tree to power their contraptions. A vessel of that light remains, and with it in hand, Ori can traverse hot surfaces that would otherwise instantly kill them, and even bend the laws of gravity. I call this place the Icy Hot Gravity Puzzle. But unfortunately, the bulk of this temple is a big carry segment. Although with the extra challenge of the controls changing on you with gravity, and the long horizontal falls turning the usual carry format on its head, it still removes all of Ori's other movement options and slows the game down. 3 out of 10, not the Ginso tree. Placing this power source activates some of the old apparatus of the Gumon, aligning platforms and firing huge lasers. Gumo's been following Ori for a while now, sometimes seen in the foreground. Now with the ruins open, he can enter and see the fate of his people, and what has become of their domain. Finally, after traversing the icy hot gravity puzzles, we reach the element of winds, finding it frozen and still. Sen tells us, the element of wind lies before us, stored in the heart of this place. These ruins are all that is left of the Gumun, reminding us of their fate. Losing the ones that he loved, Gumo is the last of his kind. Sen then restores the light to the element, shattering the ice binding it. As great winds begin to blow and the ice starts to shatter around us, Gumo grabs the power source, fleeing the ruins as music swells and we are plunged into another escape sequence. This is a rough one. Your movement is limited because you need to use Kuro's feather to ride the wind currents. Similar to the carry segments, you know my gripes with when your movement is limited. The hazards are also some of the hardest to react to in the game. The white ice on a blue background on top of them falling rather swiftly makes it very difficult to dodge them. It's probably the hardest escape sequence out of all of them in the game, making it feel like a trial and error ordeal, but the reward at the end is certainly worth it. Riding the winds higher, we eventually fly free of the collapsing cave. Ori alights in Kuro's nest. This is where everything changes. There's a lone egg here, and we see what happened. We see Kuro hunting and feeding her owlets, out in the forest of Nibil. We see the spirit tree glowing, light sweeping over the forest. We know what night this is. The spirit tree showed us. This is when the light ceremony was happening, when Ori was standing on that little hill dropping gathered fruit, while the light washed over the forest. The music here is perfect. As the light spreads, deep foreboding string tones begin to dominate the otherwise peaceful tone of the music. I remember when I first played this game, my stomach turned and I knew something was very wrong when I heard that change in tone. As the light of the spirit tree begins to wash over the nest, the little owlets try to hide, not knowing why it hurts them. A panicked Kuro is sent racing back to her nest. It's too late, as Kuro finds her children dead. The vengeful mother turns towards the spirit tree, and we understand now. The light of the spirit tree, the same light that Ori is made of, is harmful to dark creatures like Kuro and her children. As the spirit tree said, Ori had learned how they perished through our light. All along she was simply protecting her last child. With this horrible knowledge fresh on her mind, Kuro returns to her nest, likely drawn by the element of wind restoration, driving Ori from her nest and hunting us as we have to hide and work towards escaping in a stealth sequence. While the giant owl looms in the background waiting to swoop in and destroy Ori, we must dart between different bits of the background that break line of sight with Kuro, leading to some tense situations. Unless you have dash like me and you just make a run for it. With two elements restored and a terrible understanding of why this all began, we must climb Sorrow Pass to retrieve the Sunstone that will open the way to Mount Horu, where the element of warmth rests, while Kuro hunts us. With the element of winds restored, we can ride the air currents to the top of the Valley of Winds, entering Sorrow Pass. a hazardous area with little to no safe ground. Most surfaces are thorns, jagged rocks, or enemies. We rely heavily on Kuro's feather in these following areas. In Sorrow Pass, we get one of our final power-ups, the charge jump. Finally overcoming Ori's vertical challenges. This allows us to launch from the ground, breaking weakened stone floors above us, allowing us to reach new areas and even attack enemies out of it. In the Deluxe Edition, we already had the Light Burst ability, which allowed us to bash off of our own tossed projectile, so this feels slightly redundant, but in the base game this would have been a huge upgrade that would help with exploration and completion. After traversing the most hazardous regions of Sorrow Pass, we're able to ride the wind currents to the peak, where the Sunstone rests. Sen says that the bright light of this place keeps Kuro away. Like the Lost Grove, it is a vibrant and lively place, untouched by the decay in the forest below. The raging Mount Horu can be seen in the background, and if you're really lucky, there's an Easter egg that appears here sometimes in the skybox. With the Sunstone, we can open the way to the final element. After retrieving the Sunstone from the top of the pass, we see a cutscene of Ori and Naru's home. Naru lies still, where she passed, and Gumo enters, carrying the artifact of his people. As he lays a hand on Naru, it begins to glow brighter, vanishing in a flash, as Naru begins to stir. This lone Gumon, spared by Ori and spurred to act, has single-handedly saved our little family. And as he points towards Mount Horu, Naru and him begin heading that way. And, you can get smited by God here if you go too far near the edge. It's just so sudden and violent, it makes me chuckle every time. At this point, I made my way around the map, using my new abilities to grab some more upgrades before heading to Mount Horu. Mount Horu is the final temple of the game. We find the raging mountain full of lava and thoroughly on fire. Using all the skills acquired over the course of the game, we must stem lava flows, drain it away, and clear the place out. I genuinely had a rough time playing on hard mode here. I was constantly low on health and energy while working through the temple. Any slip-up resulted in huge chunks of damage, or instant death. While Ori and Sen are fighting for their lives inside, we see Naru and Gumo fighting through the fires outside. Because as the spirit tree said, Naru wished solely to see her child again. We're not even at the end and I'm getting a little choked up here. Back inside Mount Horu, I'm getting messed up by the 8 challenges of the temple. Platforming puzzles, combat, even a mini escape sequence, it's a good accumulation of everything in the game. And the damage is pretty insane. Look at this one slip up. Minus 12. That's most of my health. Anyway, with the lava drained and the way open, we can finally reach the bottom of the mountain. As we enter a large room, a roiling mass of smoke and heat can be seen in the background. The element of warmth is before us. As Sen calms the raging element, it looks like things could start returning to normal. But then, from the background, Kuro sweeps in, landing on the newly restored element and finally catching up to her prey. The chase is on. In the final escape sequence of the game, as fires rage and lava flows, we must flee from Kuro and the growing inferno. Although I do not enjoy this sequence as much as the Ginso tree, I cannot deny the grand scale of it. Combining a creeping wall of fire forcing Ori forward, the threat of Kuro swooping in if Ori remains in the open a moment too long, and requiring the use of every ability available to us. It's an edge-of-your-seat escape sequence. 8 out of 10. After managing to survive the ordeal, and with Kuro seemingly gone, leaving the fires to finish us off, we find a tired and beaten Ori. Urged by Sen to quickly get to the spirit tree to restore the light, as Ori and Sen begin gliding into the background towards the spirit tree, they are violently snatched from the air. They could not escape the sight of Kuro after all. As Ori is crushed and tossed aside, we see Naru calling to Ori among the falling trees and raging fire. And this is where the game ends, as it began for us, walking Naru to Ori. We have come so far since that stormy night. Naru, having braved the fires of Mount Horu, after being risen from the dead, only wished to see her child. As she carefully picks her way to Ori, hardly sparing the gigantic looming owl a glance, Ori, her child, lays before her, beaten and defeated after braving so many dangers and coming so close to reviving Nibel. She gathers them close. As this newly reunited mother holds Ori, memories are stirred in Kuro, of loss, of children gone, of the despair only a mother can feel. Her attention snapped from the past, Kuro sees the damage she has wrought. The fires of Mount Horu are spreading swiftly through the dying forest, reaching all the way up and threatening her final egg in the nest. The only way to save her egg, the forest, and this mother she has made a connection with, is to restore the light. Kuro is the only one that can do it. Without hesitation, she gathers up Sen and takes off, flying directly to the now burning spirit tree. Returning Sen, the light of the forest, to the spirit tree, power begins to gather, and even the music holds its breath, as a huge surge of light explodes from the tree, racing across the landscape, extinguishing the raging fires. Kuro, being a creature of darkness, who lies anathema to, is destroyed. In the massive burst of light, this titanic owl, a mother who at first only wanted vengeance for the death of her offspring, has now self-sacrificingly given her life to save the forest and her final egg. The music takes on a gentle and bittersweet humming as we see life beginning to return to the forest. Rain upon the burnt lands and sprouting flowers and grass. The greenery is returning to the forest. As we see Ori peacefully sitting among the same light-infused flowers from where they first died. Naru and Gumo are looking out over the revitalized forest before Naru returns inside their home. Where we see Kuro's final egg resting in the sun, and it begins to hatch. That's how the most emotionally evocative game I've ever played ends. I get weepy every time I watch the cutscenes from this game, even while summarizing the story and later while writing this script. It's a beautiful experience, and if you didn't take my recommendation for it at the beginning, it's still absolutely worth playing. I would say that despite its shortcomings in combat and upgrades when compared to the sequel, Ori and the Blind Forest benefits greatly from the tone set by the decaying forest, bereft of any friendly life, and the persistent presence of Kuro, the main antagonist. This leads to a much tighter story. We see Kuro 7 times during the story by my count. The original light ceremony cutscene, after the Ginso tree escape, looming over the Valley of Winds, in and outside of her nest, the light ceremony cutscene again from her point of view, hunting Ori in the Sunken Glades, and in Mount Horu. Keep this in mind for the discussion of the next game. Now, other than the more common criticisms about combat and upgrades, one of the most interesting criticisms I heard about the game was that there was an opportunity for the spirit tree to be a final grand level of sorts, if we ever reached it, which could have been interesting. The way the story wraps up, however, just gets me right in the feels, so no extra challenge needed for me. But the ending of the game could feel abrupt, if more was expected. The sacrifice of a parent is one of the most emotionally powerful things for me, and this game hits that soft spot just right for me. So you can see why I was looking forward to the sequel. So come March 2020, I was ready to dive in. Let's do this. As we begin, we again find ourselves in the beautiful forest of Nibel, restored and in balance. Ori is looking out over the forest, enjoying the sunset, and we hear a call. Ori rushes back to Gumo and into their home, and we see Naru with the owlet that hatched from the egg. So the game picks up immediately from where the blind forest left off. I've got to say, the owl redesign is a big improvement, going from the cute but albeit jellybean-like ones from the first game to the new model of Ku is a good design choice. Basically required for the movement we see of Ku as the makeshift family grows closer and raises this little owl. Unfortunately, there was something wrong with that egg. Ku was very late to hatch, months or years after the other ones. That timeline still has me stumped. I just can't make sense of it. Although it's in her nature, and she really wants to fly, Ku just can't with that stunty wing. We see nearly a year pass as our little family enjoys the fruits of fall, the snows, and a new spring. I just want to point out that Naru and Ori over here are building a snowman of her father. It's really endearing. Even with a year of growth behind her, Ku is still unable to fly. After some time sitting with the crestfallen owlet, Ori seems to have a flash of inspiration. Kuro's feather, one of the final remnants of her mother. After sizing it up, it looks like it may just work. Gumo, the ever-useful, applies the fix, and the pair are off to test it. It works! Ori and Ku are off flying in the morning light. In a scene that most reminds me of the first flight in How to Train Your Dragon, Ku and Ori fly through the forest of Nibel, taking us past places we've seen before. The Ginso Tree, Forlorn Ruins, even the Sun Peak above Sorrow Pass, before finding a group of those birds from earlier, now able to fly among them. Ku and Ori fly far out over the lake or sea bordering Nibel. It darkens, and we see another forest, but there's something wrong here. A baleful light surrounds what looks to be the giant husk of a spirit tree, and a powerful storm begins to blow. Our duo is in danger. Kuro's feathers torn from Ku's wing, and the pair lose control. Blown by the winds and cast down into this alien forest, like the first game, a storm sets events in motion. Waking in a deep, dark part of the woods, Ori begins the search for the lost Ku. While not as emotionally evocative as the opening of the first game, which really hammered at your heart with the death of Naru and Ori, seeing the little family make their way in the newly revived Nibel, to the sense of elevation and elation during the first flight of Ku, and even after the separation of Naru and Gumo, we know that Ku must be alive out there, so it does not get me the same way as the opening from the Blind Forest. Ori is left wandering the dark and stormy forest, finding a torch and searching for a way out. Here we meet our first NPC. Tak, this old shoebill wanderer here. He needs our help with a little mini-quest, finding the other keystone for a door. It's a quick trip out of the way with some climbing, and we have the other keystone. But keep in mind how soon we start encountering more friendly NPCs. Near the door in question, we see an intimidating sight. Some huge wolf-like creatures prowling in the dark. But it moves on. Psych. You can't hide in the dark when you're made of light. Hal jumps Ori, crashing through the underbrush, snapping at them, and chasing us into a dead end. Seizing upon a burning torch, Ori fights back. Eventually, after a few deaths because I suck, managing to fight Hal off and drive it away. This is our first taste of a boss fight in the game, and I have to say, a pretty decent one. I actually noticed here when redrafting that you can see Moki in the background during the fight, and we'll see more of them later. Ori finds a glowing tree shortly after dealing with Hal. This seems to be an ancestral tree like the ones in Nibil. It looks somewhat different though. Absorbing its power seems a bit rough on Ori, taking them out of action for a bit and knocking them into next week's cutscene, where we see Naru and Gumo have begun searching for the now missing Ori and Ku. Gumo points out the giant tree on the horizon and the geese flying that way. Back with Ori, we meet the Moki. These lemur-like creatures are some of the most common NPCs in the game. They are a cautious sort, living in fear of the larger predators in the forest, and surprised to see a guardian spirit like Ori in the forest again. We gained the Spirit Edge from the ancestral tree. This will be our primary melee weapon for the majority of the game. It's a fast, low-damage weapon that allows us to deal with the hostile creatures of the forest. While working through some of the sources for this video, I found some complaints that while swinging the Spirit Edge you can drift forward into enemies. I had the same problem semi-frequently, but eventually found that you can actually hold away from the enemy while spamming your Spirit Edge, and drift slightly backwards. This minor influence of your movement while hovering in the air is useful because of the amount of damage I take on hard difficulty. We continue fighting our way out of Hal's den, eventually getting back to the surface above. Upgrades come quickly this early in the game. We get double jump here, and it does not slow down. If the menu's anything to go by, there's a lot of power-ups and augments to find in this world. After this, we meet two more NPCs back to back. Lupo, this slug thing here that makes maps and sells them for Spirit Light, which is our XP, currency, souls for the game. And then just one area above him, we meet this monkey monk, here looking at the nice view. He actually drops some important information about the forest to us. We learn from him that it's been a generation of Moki since the time the Great Water Wheel turned. This starts setting up how long this forest has gone to decay. We are interrupted by a shriek, and a gigantic horned bird of some kind flying through. This is Shriek, one of the predators mentioned by the Moki earlier. Keep this in mind as we go forward. After some more exploration, some Moki find us. They tell us that Ku fell into the Silent Woods. To get there, though, we'll need the help of Quolok, who's ahead. From here, we work to get into and then through the giant toad shrine, obtaining two unique upgrades along the way. We get a bow that can be used to plink enemies from a distance and activate mechanisms. We also get the dash roll, which is very nice. It's like a smaller sprint similar to the one in the Blind Forest, but easily spammable to get us around the map faster. It's great to get this upgrade this early in the game, because I like going fast. Oh, and for dodging and platforming too. We also find our first time trial here. These are some of the optional challenges sprinkled around the game. Usually they take the form of either a combat shrine or a time trial. These each reward you differently, with Spirit Light for the time trials or upgrade slots for the combat shrines. Playing on hard, I needed all of these to keep a leg up on the difficulty. After exiting the Toad Shrine, we must be getting close to Quolok, but we are attacked by another huge creature. This giant beetle spews fire and jumps around. It's very uneventful. Probably the weakest fight in the game. I don't think the Hornbug's even mentioned later in the game in any form. No one talks about him, and neither will we. Anyway, moving away from that disappointment, we have a very special upgrade here. It's the fan favorite, the game defining, the best thing in town, the lifeblood of the game. It's Bash. You know it was Bash. We get this absolute gem of an ability again, with a great remapping of the controls so it flows better with the gameplay. Everything's a bashable object again. I can't properly describe to you how great the remapping of Bash is to left bumper for the speed of the game. Previously, you'd have to move your thumb around between triangle and X when jumping and bashing. But now with Bash on the bumper, your thumb can stay firmly glued to that jump button while you bash off of everything coming at you. I took a quick detour at this point for a surprise tool that'll help us later. Splinter Shot's very strong, and I recommend everyone mess with it a little bit. Here we finally meet Quolok, rising out of his marsh, a giant toad, a guardian of the forest. He has already heard of our plight from the Moki, but the waters Ori would have to traverse to get to the Silent Wood are fetid and dangerous. He says, though, that if the Great Water Wheel turns again, the waters will flow clear. Gives me Ginso Tree vibes, which is great because that temple's incredible. Quolok also sends us on our way with a fragment of the forest's previous light. This fragment is only the voice of the forest. However, I will be referring to the wisps by their collective name, Seer, which we don't know in-game yet, but will make this easier for me. On the way to the water wheel, we pass through the Wellspring Glades for the first time. I will talk more about this later, but it acts as a hub for the game and a source of my complaints. Arriving at the Wellspring, we see the absolute size of the area. We will have to climb through the levels of the mill, freeing up the jammed machinery and draining the foul water as we go. On our way, we find another movement ability, the Grapple. This allows Ori to latch onto and pull themselves to any blue anchor point or climbable moss nearby. We also get to mess around with some momentum puzzles on this spinning machinery here. Pretty good so far. Although sometimes, the grapple will latch onto a point rather than allowing you to bash, because it's mapped to the same button. An extreme inconvenience since one ability is the best thing ever in the game, and the other will just pull you straight through an enemy that was right there in front of you. We get an update on Naru and Gumo in a cutscene at this point. They seem to have built themselves a raft to cross the lake, sea, ocean, channel? Strait? Whatever the body of water is, in search of Ori and Ku. Nearing the top of the water wheel, there are just a few challenges remaining. This huge rotating room, a combat room, and I gotta say, the combat is really coming online at this point in the game. Especially compared to the first game where most of the combats were against a mortar worm that would, jump and spin and then go back into the ground, where you could simply walk out of the way and allow Sen to blast away at it. That's all it took. With just a few upgrades under our belt, we're able to actively engage in combat, jumping around, slashing, shooting, laying down little turrets, and of course, bashing. And this is still the early game. As we near the top of the old mill, we arrive at the library Oppener had spoke of earlier, and we find him there. He says that a foul stink hangs in the air and it seems to be coming from above. Now, because we've not invented smell-o-vision gaming yet, I have to take his word for it. So let's go check that out. Climbing the last bit, Ori comes to a room where they're suddenly seized by a large tentacle-like arm, pulled towards this foul creature that is blocking the water flow. Luckily, our monkey buddy's nearby to save the day. This leads us into our second escape sequence of the game, a watery one. I see what you did there, Moon Studio. It really does harken back to the Ginso Tree escape sequence. As the music plays, Ori is left racing through the water wheel, ahead of a wall of water released by the creature dislodging itself. I'll let this play out so you can enjoy it. 8 out of 10. Pretty good escape sequence. Awakening after the fall, with Stink skulking away in the background. The waters are clean now. We can swim through Quolok's marsh and get to the Silent Woods now, where the Maquis had seen Ku. I head straight there to find our little owl buddy. The Silent Woods are the stomping ground of Shriek, and we see him here, walking on stilt-like arms with talons left hanging. Maybe the Maquis are right to fear this one. The tone shift in the Silent Woods is dramatic. The decay here takes on a different form, dark and festering tar pits, petrification, volatile creatures, with Shriek patrolling, killing anything that disturbs the silence and catches her attention. Deeper in the Silent Woods, Ori does find Ku, in a graveyard of petrified giant owls. She must have had a terrible time here. The reunion is cut short by Shriek passing through, showing that the threat is still present. The two join up finally together again to escape the Silent Woods. For Ku to fly again, we will need Kuro's feather, which was lost in the storm. But it might be somewhere in these woods. After some searching, and when it's finally in reach, Shriek is there. And our path over here has not been a quiet one. We managed to give her the slip, if only for a little while. Then, slamming down from above, Shriek has found the pair. Attacking and separating Ori and Ku, Shriek focuses on Ori, lashing out with talon and wing. Little Ku puts on a brave face and tries to fight against the huge creature, but it's futile. Waking from the assault, Ori finds the still and lifeless body of Ku. Outside of Quolok's chamber, Ku is laid down. Everyone's gathered round, mourning, when the voice of the forest appears again. This fragment of light swirls around the room, causing the little light flowers to grow. This is a spirit fragment of the forest of Niwen. The light shattered long ago when the spirit willow died. Now, the fragments remain scattered across the forest, slowly fading. Reuniting them could save the forest, and possibly even Ku. Quolok himself even joins the search for the light fragments, going after the strength of the forest to the east in the Luma pools. Finally, one of the giant guardian animals is doing something about the decay and the state of the forest, but we'll get to that later. From here, we can go in one of two directions, and it's the only time in the story we get to choose a branch, before being funneled back into the linear story. Other than that, this is an excellent time to hunt for some upgrades, shards, quests, and new abilities which I am sorely needing at this point. The combat shrines can be very difficult, but the reward of an extra slot for more shards is great. Each successive shard allows you to build synergies, increasing the power of Ori and staying ahead of the curve. There's also these time trials which grant Spirit Light, the XP/souls of the game, for completing them within the time. These offer hefty amounts of light, offering a faster way of acquiring it in lieu of farming enemies. There are also the side quests. Now I want to talk about them briefly, because there are so many side quest giving NPCs in the game that it feels like this dead, decaying forest is actually quite alive and bustling, and you Yes, you there, with the dead child. You're the only one that can fix all their problems. You see how this sets a different tone from the first game, where the forest was barren and the number of characters could be counted on one hand. The rewards and spirit light from completing the quests does make them beneficial, and I needed it, but this is one of my fundamental gripes with the story of The Will of the Wisps. With all these NPCs around, some of them being giant fucking guardian animals who are doing nothing to save the forest. Now, there might be something special about Ori, being a little light spirit and all, that sets them apart from the rest of these NPCs. But someone here could have fixed some of these problems. Now imagine this. You have a little garden, pictured here. A nice little place of order in the wild world of your backyard. And this little plot of land, shaped by your hands and under your protection, is just going to shit. The watering system is garbage, there's some bugs in the soil, the frost got to the tips of your tomatoes, and you're like, nah, I'm just gonna take a nap, sit in the tub, lock myself in the basement, what these guardian animals did. Because that's basically what they did here. It's a shameful tragedy of the commons right there. Props to Kolok for at least, going and doing something when the help arrived, being Ori, but if you see where I'm coming from, you see where I'm coming from. Anyway, moving on from the side quests, I decided to go the opposite direction as compared to my first playthrough, and venture into the Luma Pools, a coral-covered area, a much more vibrant area of the forest, protected by the element of strength. They've avoided a lot of the decay seen elsewhere. Kolok, with Moki in tow, has gone ahead of us, searching for the light fragment. Apparently everyone's gone ahead of us. Talk and Lupo, the map maker, are already here. I'm annoyed that this slug manages to beat us everywhere. Slugs. Well renowned for their speed. Eventually, after navigating some swimming puzzles, leading these explosive torpedo-like enemies into walls, we meet up with Kolok. The one out here actually doing something. He claims it has been a long time since he left his hollow. Could have done something about that, huh? And a familiar stench is nearby. On the way, I find some glitches that let me get to places I shouldn't be, lots of bubbles, some more puzzles, a few power-ups, an upgrade, combat, and other side quest stuff. The usual. We finally find some concerned Moki. Something's wrong with Kolok. The water he sits in is dark, and as the strength of the forest comes close, he snatches it. Kolok is being puppeted by Stink, and I don't think Stink likes us very much. This leads to a short escape sequence, where we must dodge Stink's many arms and outpace the puppeted Kolok before one of the boss fights of the game. Stink puppets Kolok around the arena, launching projectiles, lashing out with his tongue, and even using his entire body as a giant bludgeon. As we get better at the fight and get farther and farther into the health bar, we start hitting certain checkpoints and triggering different phases to the fight. Each acts to raise the difficulty, changing the terrain, new moves, and in the final phase, any kind of healing, short of that one shard power that lets you overheal when you smack him a bunch, is out of the question, due to the rising waters. This is one fight where I had the aforementioned drifting that can happen when you're swinging the spirit edge, taking some pointless damage because I started my attack too close to him while holding towards him. Eventually, through multiple trials and perseverance, you'll burn through his health, eventually putting the poor guy down. In his last moments, Kolok is able to fight back and crush Stink, leaving Ori to watch over the Moki before fading away. like Luke in that one bad Star Wars. Quolok, the only guardian animal, spurred to action, dies for it. It's sad. He's the only one that got out of his little hole to do anything, and he dies for it. His sacrifice isn't in vain, but no good deed goes unpunished. With the element of strength in hand, I tried to go to the windswept wastes because I wanted to try a different order from my previous playthrough. Sneaking through the feeding grounds, avoiding Shriek, reminded me of hiding from Kuro after the Forlorn Ruins. The Windswept Wastes is a desert area with some of the most aggressive enemies in the game, and I'm not supposed to be here yet. I get through the whole place, getting the burrowing upgrade, dying to underground lasers over and over and over and over, just to get turned away at the end because I don't have all the wisps. My face went. By the way, all the usual NPCs are here too. Because, you know. So, diverted from my path, I head up to the frozen area. Here we meet Bauer. You see, it's like bear. Another guardian animal of Newen. Apparently, he has been dreaming of the goings-on in Newen, but doing nothing. He tells Ori that he has dreamt of their arrival, but is too late to save the land. One of the wisps is at the peak of the mountain, and then he goes back to sleep. Just, sleeping there. From here, we're left to explore the frozen upper reaches of the forest. This area always confuses me a bit. There's 2 separate entrances, and I always manage to get lost. This entrance here reminds me of Sorrow's Pass. The entirety of the walls and floors and everything is coated in spikes, requiring you to use Kuro's feather to ride air currents. Further in, we get the fire grenade upgrade. It's a lobbed projectile, like the light grenade from the first game, that can light enemies on fire for some damage over time. But most importantly, you can bash off of it after charging up the projectile for a little while. Now, you know how much I like bashing off of the light grenade in the Blind Forest? Well, same goes here. But I do it a bit less than the first game because there are more movement options in general. But that's besides the point. We also find that Shriek is in the area, flying about, doing Shriek things and stuff. At this point, I literally got so lost that I went down to a different area and completed it instead of finishing the peak. But I'll skip over that, and we'll talk about what happens up here first. When I finally become unlost in the ice area, I realize that I'm just supposed to melt this ice here, which is holding up the tree blocking my way. Back on track, and with many things trying to kill me, I knew I was going the right direction. And the last of the mountain climb was pretty normal, riding rising heat and dodging some enemies, or just face tanking them like a scrub. We arrive at the peak, where there's this blossoming tree frozen over by the winter, ushered in by the decay. Why is it an icy winter over here, like petrification over there? I just don't know with the decay. It's different everywhere. It's bizarre. Anyway, a wisp emerges from the branches. This is the memory of the forest, and the other fragments join it. But the sound of huge wing beats can be heard as Shriek is hunting for Ori, and we have been spotted. The chase is on, as Shriek crashing into the top of the mountain begins an avalanche and we must flee. Unfortunately, I find this sequence pretty easy, so I don't get to enjoy the music for long. Eventually, falling down a deep gorge and losing Shriek, Ori awakens to the guardian animal Bauer, having just dug us out of the snow. He tells us, "You have awoken the forest's memory, and me with it." Oh, now he's awake. We only had to cause a natural disaster nearby and drop a few tons of snow on his head for that to happen. Hashtag just guardian animal things. But now, with the memory of the forest recovered and Bauer awake, we get some backstory on Shriek. We've seen this place before. It's the owl graveyard in the Silent Woods, where the decay causes petrification. A pair of giant owls around a nest, long dead and petrified, when one of the eggs begins to stir. From this decay-contaminated egg, this little owlet, covered in stony-like growths, is hatched. An orphan emerges, small, lonely and weak. Shriek wanders through the forest, leaving the Silent Woods behind, and seeing owls flying through the skies. She heads that way. Eventually, she finds some young owlets. It almost looks like Shriek will make a connection. But before that, the adults swoop in and drive off this twisted mockery of an owl. Driven back to the Silent Woods to live out her days alone. As Bauer puts it, she is lost, a pitiful creature, her heart is stone. Gone too is the summer of the past, never to return. But thanks to you, Spirit, a new summer will rise to take its place. Now that we know what happened to Shriek, does it change anything compared to what is revealed to us in Kuro's Nest? How does the characterization of this arch-villain in Will of the Wisps compare to the Blind Forest? We'll talk more about this later. The final wisp to be retrieved before the desert area will open for me is in the Moldwood Depths, which I've already cleared at this point due to getting lost earlier, but hey, I've not told you about it yet, and I'm the master of this timeline. Here's another glitch on my way over. Okay, I wanna... Even with all the patches, there's still some fun ones that you find. On the way down to the depths, I do the musical bell puzzle with Talk, which nets me another 25% damage upgrade. Very necessary, as it only gets harder from here, and opens a little optional area. The Twisting Tunnel is an optional area of the game that kind of reminds me of the Ginso tree crossed with Blackroot Burrow. With the portals and momentum-based platforming in the deep, dark part of the forest. Even the map NPCs down here. Again. Wasn't this place, like, sealed 2 minutes ago? Like, what the fuck? Anyway, I'm just down here for part of the hand-to-hand quest line, in the form of this little tablet for Talk. This will come in later, and was part of me trying to get as much completion as possible during this run of the game. I'm not sure if this little detour was important to the flow of the video, but I just want to point out all the NPCs, everywhere, all the time. Can't get away from them. Anyway, Moldwood Depths is probably my favorite area of the game, as it hits a bunch of great notes for me. The Depths is probably the most hostile area in the game, as the Moki say after opening it. Keep out of the darkness. It skitters, it bites. This is very literal advice. From the initial drop, it's already an unpleasant place. Everything is covered in spikes, or more accurately, the spiky twitching corpses of large bugs. Volatile slimes and these bat things, which are the worst enemy in the game. And then we come to the darkness. The darkness down here is so aggressive and malignant that it rapidly closes in and will snuff out Ori. Eventually, after navigating for a while, we find the light in the dark. The flash ability granted by this ancestral tree here. In exchange for a constant energy drain, Ori produces a powerful light that can damage nearby enemies and push back the darkness down here. By the way, the map NPC's here too. You know, in the dark that kills you if you're too slow. The slug is here. With flash lighting the way, we can delve deeper into the depths, eventually finding a bright light covered in a mass of webbing. And creeping from the back, a massive spider, sprouting cordyceps-like growths all over its body. Smashing the floor under Ori and plunging us into what might be my favorite boss fight of the game. Moria, the great guardian animal driven mad. Smashes around the arena, shooting venom and sending fiery shockwaves across the ground. And can I say that the score is perfect? Lots of string instruments and horror tones in it. Matches the tone of the depths perfectly. As we get good at the fight and finally start making some progress into their health bar, Moria begins summoning little baby spiders that hit significantly harder than her somehow. Looks like someone's been slacking. And eventually, she begins to destroy the whole arena, leading to a micro escape sequence, which I wish was longer, but unfortunately it's just this. Now, in a new area with the wisp we had seen earlier in the background, the music shifts, and Ori's theme begins coming through. It's as if Ori's theme and Moria's theme are competing for dominance during the fight. And in the last phase, Moria summons the darkness to engulf the arena. This would be a big issue if you were low on energy and weren't able to use flash. But a couple more bashes and it's done. Great fight. Ginso 3 out of 10. After the defeat of Moria, the wisp bursts forth from the webbing, cleansing the infected Moria and reuniting with the other fragments we currently have. With the spiders left to recover and the darkness receding, we can leave. I also want to point out that I effectively beat up her children here. No mercy. Now that we have all the wisps needed to get into the desert temple, I of course go to the glades and do more upgrades and do some more hand-to-hand quest stuff and have some funny glitches. And then I go do that. Now that we're here, with all the wisps, like we know what we're doing, we're not turned away from the doors to the wind-torn ruins. This temple's where we get some very interesting history and prophecy revealed to us. There are these massive murals depicting the history of the forest. Here we are granted some knowledge of the symbolic nature of the light and the spirit trees. The light is eternal, but the vessels, the mighty spirit trees, will wither and die someday. It is also hinted that there are many such trees, meaning many such forests in the world. The second mural shows the death of the spirit willow, and the fallout of the events resulting in the death of many or all light spirits, like Ori here in Nguyen. Hence why we've been finding all our upgrades at ancestral trees that sprout from where they fell. Darkness and ruin comes over the land. We begin to get some prophecy, as it depicts Ori, a light spirit foretold to come to the forest, reunite the 5 fragments and continue the cycle. The final mural, that would be the future of the forest, is shattered. But a massive spirit tree can be seen, not shaped like the willow. Seer tells us that the Gorlek believed that anything broken can be repaired, and protected the heart of the forest here in the ruins. Well, could someone repair this mural, please? I want to see what happens. Deeper in the ruins, we find a Golek statue, which opens upon our approach. And the final fragment, the heart of the forest, emerges. Combining with the other 4 fragments Ori currently has, the light of the forest is returned, in some capacity. Now a larger, golden light, Seer. But then, barging from the ground nearby, holy shit, is that a graboid? Hey guys, it's my favorite movie, 1990's Tremors, starring Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward, an homage to B-grade monster movies that perfectly balances horror, comedy, camp, tension, great practical effects, lots of fucking guns. In the small Nevada town of Perfection, our 2 heroes are a couple of handymen caught up in a fight for their lives as the valley is besieged by giant underground worms, snatching up different residents and cutting off the main road into the valley. The 2 unwilling heroes, Val and Earl, have to use their wits to survive the hidden predators. When I first saw this movie, I was terrified by it. I was 8 years old, Netflix still mailed you DVDs, and I walked in on the scene where the sheep farmer's disembodied head is discovered under his hat, after he was pulled underground and eaten. Instant fear, ran away, had nightmares. Later, when I was older, I revisited the movie and found I absolutely loved it. It has such great characters, setups, payoffs. Now, I take the chance whenever I can to share it with friends. Now I'm sharing it with you. There's even a Tremors extended universe, because that's a thing we do now, right? Tremors 2 Aftershocks, it's shit. The use of CGI is bad, and taking the monsters above ground was a mistake. Kind of fun, though. Tremors 3 Back to Perfection, also shit. They fly now. Tremors 4 The Legend Begins, a prequel starring the great-grandfather of Burt Gummer. This one's actually pretty good. Need to watch it again, though. Tremors 5 Bloodlines, worst fucking movie I've seen in the series. They're in Africa, the worms jump out of the ground now to attack, it's terrible. Tremors 6, A Cold Day in Hell, why are they still making these? 2018 direct-to-DVD, looks like shit, haven't seen it. Tremors 7, Shrieker Island, it looks even worse. And there's a TV show! But anyway, this is the giant sandworm escape sequence. Originally it was harder, as the worm was faster, but at the time of recording, the escape sequence has been nerfed. Some tight maneuvering and use of the new burrow ability will see Ori through the experience, and the worm disposed of as quickly as it arrived. And the remains of the Golek temple, worse for wear. Adequate escape sequence, 6 out of 10. Now, with all the fragments united, the end of the game is in sight. Seer takes the chance to show us how tremendously powerful they are, banishing an entire sandstorm and clearing the way to the Weeping Ridge, where the remains of the Spirit Willow rest. Before going there, though, I take some time and finish up the hand-to-hand quest, which reveals all secrets on the map. Using this, I find some new nooks and crannies and grab some upgrades before heading to the Willow. On the way there, Seer blows up Shriek, and I teleport up to... Wait. What? Shriek comes crashing down, towering over Ori and the newly restored Seer, and Seer takes that personally. As she rears back, Seer gathers a tremendous amount of energy, exploding in the face of Shriek, shattering the petrified mask. As a dazed Shriek cowers, Seer begins to gather that energy again to finish the deed. But then Ori stops it, grabbing the light, calming it, hoping to reach out to this injured creature. We've seen this before. Ori has a childlike innocence, and has been merciful to creatures that have tried to kill them before, like Gumo in his hideout. But Shriek is too far gone. Fleeing from the two when there's an opening, blinded by her past, as the narrator says. There's no reaching her. On a lighter note, listen to this little audio oversight, where the stick they previously used in a stealth segment is still very loud for no reason. As we teleport through here, closer to the tree, we find ourselves at the base of an elevator, where we have another elevator fight riding up towards the entrance to the Weeping Ridge. The landscape here changes drastically. It's now dominated by purple, orange, blues, and reds, a corrupted and blighted place. The willow and the ridge below are like a slowly festering corpse of a titan, and we must navigate the perils within. Here we get the final ability for the game, Launch. This allows Ori to pause in the air, pick a direction, and well, launch. It's the second best movement ability in the game. Sure, it's faster than Bash, you can use it whenever you want, you don't need a projectile, but you can only use it once before having to touch a wall or the ground to reset it. And nothing will ever replace Bash in my heart. However, without Launch we would not be able to complete the challenges ahead. When we arrive at Willow's End, Seer opens the way before us. And the narrator says, all paths led to the Spirit Willow. In a cutscene, we see that Naru and Gumo finally arrived at Nguyen as Ori enters Willow's End. It's a very hostile place, bristling with spines, filled with oozing purple slime, much like Mount Horu in the Blind Forest. It will be an accumulation of everything we have learned in the game up to this point in one challenging area. Just replace the lava with purple. And wouldn't you know it? I really shouldn't be surprised at this point. This fucking slimy bastard is here. The fucking map slug NPC has made his way all the way here to Willow's End, the most dangerous area, ahead of me, who opened it. You know, if he could get in a back way, like, why did I even do half the game? Why doesn't he just do it? He can fix the whole forest. He clearly gets around. The map is free this time, at least. Our path is blocked by the decay. We need to burst 6 pustules to clear the way. It's a lot like draining the lava from Mount Horu. We do some platforming, run from a boulder, take some insane environmental damage to get the first one, navigate some lasers to get this one, bounce between projectiles, or just launch and burrow for this one, do some falling, redirect some projectiles, glitch out the game, navigate more lasers, redirect Ori again, and do our best impression of an A10 warthog. This is what I meant when I said that the split shot was a surprise tool for later. It just does work. After that, the way opens. And after ascending, the willow towers over Ori. Seer says that we've done it. The light will be restored, and the damage will be undone. As Seer lights on the husk of the Spirit Willow, the golden light swells, drawing power from the forest. As light rises from the forest, forming spectral branches of spirit light on the ancient tree, Seer says that this light is not theirs anymore. They cannot be the light of the forest anymore, and they wish to give that light to Ori. In kind of a foreboding speech, they say, "My child, I give the light to you, though to bear it you must grow. One life you must now leave behind to save the lives of all. Join now with Seer, embrace the light, care for this land as I once did." As Seer descends from the tree, Shriek descends from the sky, seizing Seer like Kura once did with Sen, and then the battle begins. Shriek, the gigantic deformed owl, strikes an imposing figure, and is incredibly powerful, sundering the very ground where Ori stands and toppling the remains of the once great Spirit Willow in her path of destruction. The battle is composed of multiple segments, with checkpoints between each section. First, A fight under the Spirit Willow. Shriek attempts to stomp and land on Ori, sending fiery shockwaves across the arena. After doing enough damage, Shriek is done with this place, and decides that we need to go somewhere else, destroying the ground and sending us into an escape sequence. As the Willow topples in the background, this is probably the most tight escape sequence in the game. You have to go as fast as possible or be punished by huge phantom hitboxes, and damage for no reason. This got me a lot of times. It's a little bit infuriating when you're killed before Shriek is even on screen. Like, look at this. Just poof, dead. And then Shriek's talons come on screen about a second later. It's like I'm playing Dark Souls 2 all over again. While you watch me fail this sequence a few more times, I want to say how great the music is in this section. Ori and Shriek's themes fight for dominance in the forefront as the battle rages. For this fight, I set up Ori like a glass cannon, putting everything behind Spike. The big spirit light spear does good damage, but it's very expensive. I used multiple shards to bring down the cost of it and do more damage, of course. Then we arrive at the final arena. Shriek throws out more attacks than ever. Slamming wings, flybys, lasers, the iconic Shriek. As my spikes chunk away at her health, Shriek decides that the ground is overrated, and begins destroying that too. Forced into the air, you must use the best two abilities of the game to stay aloft, dodging constant flybys and trying to get some damage in while under constant fire. The raining projectiles provide constant threat, as well as a prime source for some good bashing. It is only a matter of time until you slip up and get yourself killed. But persevere and see it through to the end. As you deliver the final blow to the tyrant of the Silent Woods, she is sent spinning, cast down upon the ground. It's a good fight. It's a fun one. But this is where most of my gripes with the story come from. The ending here. Mortally wounded, Shriek awakens. And takes flight, back to the Silent Woods. Back to the very nest she hatched from. Back to her only home. Curling up under the corpses of her parents, she dies. No redemption, no sacrifice, no mercy from Ori. She dies alone. No heroic swoop in, no tender soundtrack that still makes me misty-eyed. Just a bitter end, fading away where this cursed creature was born. It's not the only bitter end either. The crushed form of Seer rests upon a little hill amid all the destruction left by Shriek. And as we pan over to the battered and weak form of Ori, clinging to life, they drag themselves towards Seer. Visions of Naru, Gumo, Ku, Quolok, and even the Moki appear and fade. Ori cannot turn back. We literally cannot turn back. Knowing this is the end, and at the beckoning of Seer, Ori releases Kuro's feather and holds Seer close. Before vanishing in a wash of golden light. The golden light pierces the sky, lighting the whole forest. The NPCs from the glades can be seen watching from a distance. while below, Ku rises from the dead, healed of the deformed wing, and embraced by Naru. On this little hill, all alone, Ori ceases to be the energetic, childish, merciful, naive little forest spirit we've been with for 2 games, washed away in the light of a foreign forest, as the prophecy in the wind-torn ruins foretold. Standing over the light-touched patch of grass, the Moki and Ori's loved ones briefly mourn. Before a light jeweled sprout emerges from the ground. And Ori says, "I embraced the light." Ori has been narrating this entire journey for us, like the spirit tree of Nebel, narrated for us in the blind forest. From here, we see Ori, now a spirit tree, grow as time passes quickly. We see Ku grow and fly past while Ori is still small, never to be seen again. Gumo and Naru grow old and feeble, fading away as the inexorable march of time moves on. Ori is doomed to see all their loved ones fade away, their likenesses grown into the surface of the tree, having long outlived their family. Ori still watches over the forest of Niwen. As a light leaf falls from Ori's branches, much like the first game, as new light spirits are born. That's where it ends. That was the bitter ending that nagged at the back of my mind long enough to put this video together. Ori, the lively, childish, innocent and merciful creature, died alone on a little hill, transformed into a new form, used by the light of a foreign forest to fulfill a prophecy, destined to outlive the only family they ever had. Just as Ori was beginning to mature now, from the first game, where Sen did much of the fighting for Ori, to this one, where Ori was fighting for themselves, beginning to grow and mature into a truly good creature in the world, that was cut short to become a tree. And that just didn't sit right with me. Not only was Ori done wrong by this ending, I think Shriek was done wrong too. Because of the larger scope of the story, we only encounter Shriek a handful of times across a dozen hours, where we also see other great creatures that are threats to Ori, unlike Kuro in the first game, which was the only imposing creature actively hunting down Ori. Shriek almost feels like a late game addition, even though we encounter them fairly early in the game. It felt unfocused compared to the characterization given to Kuro in the Blind Forest. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very similar problem to Doom Eternal vs. Doom 2016, which I played around the same time, and is also in my top 5 games. Like Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Doom Eternal is a sweeping improvement in almost every way. It looks better, plays better, feels better, except for how quickly you run out of ammo. But the story does not mesh with the expectations the first game established for me, and it left me wanting. As I also mentioned near the beginning of the video, the content creator who originally got me to try the Blind Forest came back briefly to answer questions for some of the fans, some of which were about Will of the Wisp. Turns out he loves the game, and he thinks it's great, although saying it did not reach the same emotional high points as the first game for him. Crimson Narkugara here, who he was responding to, actually brings up some excellent points about the story, theme, and the potential plot holes of Will of the Wisps. Feel free to pause it here and read the post. It's rare that I find myself coming back to a game repeatedly just for gameplay. I usually need to connect with or be compelled by a story to feel drawn back in. I'm not sure if I'll play Will of the Wisps again, outside of a challenge run or perhaps another stream. But I have revisited the Blind Forest, again while working on this video. I still implore all of you to give the games a try, even though I've gone through the whole stories of both. The emotional parts will hit different without my dumb voice over the carefully crafted moments and genuinely amazing soundtrack. Moon Studios really knocked the ball out of the park with these games, and I'm glad I got to play them. If I ever do this again for another game, perhaps Doom, it'd be a lot of the same reasoning. The story just did not go the way I thought it should, and it left me a bit disappointed, but I'm literally a programmer, not a story writer, so what do I really know? Oh yeah, and I'm a programmer now, because I changed jobs fucking 3 times while working on this. If you stuck around to the end of this video, I want to genuinely thank you. This has been a massive undertaking, and although this project went on hiatus a few times, hence why it took so long, I didn't want to let this die. And so, even if it's really late, I'm putting it out there. And if I see a good response, it will probably motivate me to do more. So, let me know if you like it. Thank you.